now I call the last speaker of this session, Mr. Adam Lobel, please, who will present a game for helping interoceptive awareness, and who is here from Geneva University, and I let you present yourself.
One if you need.
Sure, one.
Yes, one moment. Yes, I prefer, yes. Thank you. Yes? Okay. Sorry, one moment. Okay. Okay, hi. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Adam Lobel, and I'm going to be presenting this game called Nevermind. I begin, though, with a warning. So I'm going to be presenting, Nevermind is a very mature game, and there's a lot of mature content in it. So people that might be a little bit sensitive, especially to perhaps violence or tragedy, may want to step out of the room, and I mean that very seriously. Okay. So let's get into Nevermind. Well, first, just quickly about myself. Like I said, my name is Adam Lobel. I have a PhD. I'm actually a psychology researcher gone game designer. And several years ago, as a young PhD candidate, I found myself interested in the following question. Can stressful video games be used to help people cope with stress in their everyday lives? So on a mechanistic level, this question manifested itself as follows. Do stressful video games give players a greater awareness of their physiological states, a greater interoceptive awareness, we can call it? And if so, does this aid them in their everyday lives? Well, lo and behold, I wasn't the only person contemplating this idea. Enter Nevermind, a commercial video game developed by Flying Mollusk and released on Steam and Xbox One. That's the creative director, Aaron Reynolds, and the game's creative producer, Michael Anetta. Nevermind casts the player as a neuroprober, a therapist of the future. As a neuroprober, it's your job to enter the minds of clients suffering from severe, life-hindering psychological distress. The challenge is that your clients can't remember the root cause of their anxiety. They have a traumatic memory locked up somewhere in their subconscious, and it's your job to navigate and unravel that memory. On top of this psychological horror theme, Nevermind incorporates biofeedback at a fundamental level of its design, which I'll flesh out more soon. But in general, biofeedback refers to a system whereby the player's physiological states provides the game world with input. The game world then reacts to this input, which provides feedback to the player. In the case of Nevermind, Your client's subconscious is not happy that another person, you, the player, is lurking around, digging. As a result, the more stress that the player feels, and the higher their heart rate, for example, the more hostile the game world becomes. Now, Nevermind is compatible with a wide variety of heart monitoring devices, and it also takes advantage of emotion recognition technology using just standard webcams and algorithms that are incorporated on the back end that have been developed by a company called Affectiva. So I want to give a quick concrete example of how this biofeedback mechanic works in the game, and then and then I'll discuss Nevermind in greater detail. So in this example, the player enters a room. In this case, it's the kitchen, and our volume isn't really working that well, but that's okay. You'll notice the milk carton. Now, if the player is experiencing high levels of stress, the room will begin to fill with milk higher and higher. And the more stress they feel, the higher the milk will rise in the room, until eventually they might even be drowning in milk. However, if they're able to calm themselves down, lower their heart rate, come back to a resting state, the milk will subside and danger will be thwarted. And you may have also noticed that the screen also became very fuzzy. This is something that happens anywhere when the player's in the game. The screen will increase in static when it's detecting that the players are experiencing stress. So in the game, you're being placed in stressful environments and being challenged to manage your stress in order to solve puzzles and overcome the anxiety which is creeping up around you. So I want to share 3 design principles that help maximize players' involvement in Nevermind. These are sort of lessons for game designers. And for the first 2 to make sense, it's really necessary that I disclose things about the narrative in one of Nevermind's levels. So big spoiler alert for anybody that wants to play the full game without anything being given away. So in this level, the player enters the mind of client number 251, a young, middle-aged woman suffering from severe anxiety. In a monologue at the beginning of the level, the woman explains that she often becomes paranoid around people. It seems like they're looking at her, judging her. This makes her feel guilty and angry. None of this seems to make sense, she tells you, her neuroprober. She remembers a happy childhood, having tea parties in the garden, solving jigsaw puzzles with her father. Of course, it was sad that her father passed away in a car accident when she was very young, but life had always been so good for her. Why are suddenly these intense feelings of social anxiety and guilt? Well, I'm going to kind of cut to the chase and tell you why. Over the course of the level, the player learns what really happened on the day of her father's death. In actuality, things were not so rosy at home. Dad's bills were piling up, Mom started taking to alcohol, and the two were barely speaking. Here we see one of the photographs which the player finds from solving the game's puzzles. And these photographs serve as clues in the game. So this one reads, "Daddy and his letters. He never wanted to play after the mailman brought new ones." One hot summer day in this sort of climate at home, client number 251 entered the kitchen to pour some milk for her tea party. Clumsily spilling the milk all over the kitchen floor, she called her mother for help, but got no response. Climbing upstairs to her parents' bedroom, she creeped her way up there, slowly but surely, and entered the room. Standing before her was her father, gun in hand, pointed at himself. Bang! There, she stood as her father gruesomely committed suicide. So I know what you're thinking. That escalated quickly. I know. It unfolds over the course of the level. The reason, well, first, I did say that it's for mature audiences, but the reason why I kind of cut to the chase and disclose it is I'm not just doing this for shock value. I'm trying to retell this so that, because it's necessary for me to share these design principles, of which I'm going to share 3. And again, these are design principles that I want to share with you in order for you to think about maximizing player involvement, making it feel like each player is having their own special, unique experience. So let's talk about the first one. This is called Thematic Congruence. Thematic congruence means that there's an overlap between the themes of the game and the player's visual experience. So themes like social anxiety, domestic unrest, guilt, separating fact from fiction, these are all reflected by the game's art and colors and in the objects that appear in the game. So for example, The idea that client number 251's family unit was corroded, that her parents were not getting along, is depicted by you inhabiting a literally broken home. Also, client number 251 talks about this intense guilt that she feels when she's being looked at. So all of the portraits in the game have either blank faces or they're blotched out aggressively. And not only do these images occur throughout the game, like here, but in certain portions, faces will follow your player staring at you in judgment. As a final example, at the heart of it, client number 251 feels personally responsible for her father's suicide. The crux of the trauma is that she associates spilling the milk with her father's death. And what do we see when we encounter the spilled milk? We see spilled blood. The second design principle is environmental storytelling. Now, when your game has such consistent thematic congruence, as a designer, you can convey your story via the game world. So if all the art in the game has a purpose that matches the themes in your game, then exploring the world comes to have meaning for each individual player. So, the more you explore, the more you're rewarded with details that help tell a story. For example, the environment clues the player into client number 251's sense of guilt, having spilled the milk. You spilled, they might find, or they might see it here if they're really, really clever. And here's a jigsaw puzzle that the client mentions in her opening monologue. This one reads Fractured Family Incorporated. Again, giving the player clues. These are not necessary to find in the game, but they give each individual player different clues. Here's one that's really messed up. For players who dare to investigate the spilled over milk carton, they get treated to these super dark messages. So, happy home milk is obvious sarcasm. But if you turn the milk carton over in an extreme attention to detail, the nutrition facts read, total fault, your fault. They know, your fault. Again, bringing home the idea that the client feels guilty about having spilled the milk and associating that with her father's suicide. Now, I could go on and on with more examples, but I just want to drive home the point here. These instances of environmental storytelling not only compel players to explore the game world, but with each discovery, the player feels more and more like they are cultivating their own personalized experience, right? It's like they're a detective adding clues to their own private dossier. And that brings us to the third design characteristic, the symbiotic biofeedback. So while environmental storytelling is one great way of making players feel like their experience in Nevermind is unique to them, the game's biofeedback mechanic is especially important. So in the first place, the biofeedback mechanic in Nevermind is consistent with the game's aims and design. And this is a really important point, because it's very easy for biofeedback games to get this wrong. You could, for instance, imagine a game where my increased heart rate in the real world will lead the player in the game to moving faster, as if my heart rate is running and I'm able to run quicker. The more active you feel, the more active you are in the game. But in Nevermind, this doesn't really make, this actually opposes the core design of the game. So instead, an elevated heart rate indicates and stimulates adversity, which forces the player to recognize their change in physiology and then resolve it healthily. So in this sense, Nevermind's biofeedback mechanic is deeply embedded in its design, and that's what I would encourage people to think about. So I'm running a little bit out of time, but I just wanted to kind of share like the general gist of the idea that ultimately when you're playing the game, you should also be able to recognize different gradations in how much anxiety you experience in different portions of the game. So you might recognize for yourself that whereas in the kitchen, it took you maybe 45 seconds, a minute and a half, 5 minutes to calm down in the first instance of play, by returning to that environment, you can see with yourself in a very personalized way that you're able to manage your anxiety in that situation maybe in quicker ways. So to close, Nevermind exemplifies good game design practices and shows promise as a tool for training players' awareness of their internal states, in my opinion, because it is designed to cultivate a personalized experience for its users. How does it do this? Through thematic congruence and environmental storytelling, and finally, by having a biofeedback mechanic that not only works technically, but which is relevant and logical for its aims. Thank you very much for your attention. And I want to quickly thank the game's designers, again, Aaron and Michael Anetta. This is Mariantina Gatzis, who oversaw me when I did research on the game. And it's a commercially available game. It's on sale, so pick it up, or come play it with me here during the demo stand during GSGS. Thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there one or two questions, max?
Hello, thank you very much.
Yes.
I have a question about, so you said you did your PhD on that, and I was wondering if you did some empirical data collection, because what I'm interested in is how do you, so the idea is that the persons experience the game, so the experience of the persons in a way go through the game and then is supposed to come back to himself and raise awareness or change something in internal state, and I was wondering how you could measure that, basically, if you did so.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, thank you so much for your question. So to clarify, this was one small portion of my PhD project, and what I did with this research experiment was I actually went into the lab and just did basically an observational study. So I wasn't looking for the effect. I was purely looking to see how do people experience it, and looking at just their heart rate data and matching that with in-game events to see whether there were markers for people being better or worse at managing their stress. So that was my personal research interest. But to push things forward for research, to take that approach, there are several measures for what we call interoceptive awareness. There are some, for example, self-report measures, which I'm a little skeptical about. One of the most commonly used measures is actually sort of this heartbeat detection task, where you measure somebody's heart rate and you ask them to kind of count off where they think the beats are occurring, and the discrepancy between the objective and the subjective is a sort of measure of interoceptive awareness. But it's kind of a growing field, and I'd be happy to talk with you more about it over the break, but that's, yeah. You're welcome.
Thank you. One question here.
Bonjour, très belle présentation, bravo. Est-ce qu'en français ça va ou vous
Mais désolé, je n'ai pas pour français.
All right. So the question is the following. We are talking about stress here, and all I see is physical activation or arousal.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, this game will help manage arousal or stress?
Mm-hmm. It's an excellent question. So, and thank you for it. From my perspective, what I find interesting about Nevermind, and of course, I should also mention that if we were to, the developers say this themselves, if they were to implement it as a serious game, now it's a commercial game, this is just for fun, right? If they were to implement it as a serious game, they would make design changes to make it more educational, right? That being said, for me, at the crux of it is underlying both stress and physiological arousal is an awareness of where your body is at. And there's an idea in psychology about being better aware of your physiological state just gives you better awareness of your emotional state, your mental state, etc. So for me, what I find interesting about it is that it's giving you constant visual feedback about your physiological state. And in doing so, the hope is, and if it's maybe redesigned and repurposed a little bit, the hope is that it could then give people that insight in their everyday lives, that they're able to make that association. And that should hopefully extrapolate and generalize to different domains like stress and general physiological arousal is the idea. I hope that made sense. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have no more time for other questions. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
You can stay here because we will do the round table now.